Organizing for positive change in an oppressive society. How do ordinary people defeat a system designed to keep them powerless? Why do some oppressive societies remain trapped for generations, while others transform themselves without firing a single shot? History is filled with powerful rulers, corrupt institutions, and systems built on fear. Again and again, people have found themselves living under conditions they did not choose, burdened by injustice, silenced by intimidation, and convinced that nothing could ever change. Yet something remarkable keeps happening. A small group of determined individuals begins talking. Then they begin organizing. Then they begin building. And somehow, against all odds, the impossible starts becoming possible. The most dangerous threat to oppression has never been weapons. It has never been violence. It has never been anger. It has always been organized, people united by a shared vision. But how does that happen? How do citizens transform fear into courage, isolation into solidarity, and frustration into meaningful change? Few people realize the truth. The answer lies in understanding how every successful movement for positive change begins. Intro. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that the rules are unfair, the opportunities are limited, the institutions are broken, and the people in power seem determined to keep things exactly as they are. For millions throughout history, this was not imagination, it was reality. From colonial territories struggling for self-determination to communities fighting discrimination. From workers demanding dignity to citizens seeking accountability. People have faced the same question. How do you create change when those who benefit from the current system control the resources, the institutions, and often the narrative itself? Some movements failed. Others succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The difference often came down to one thing: organization, not outrage, not slogans, not wishes. Organization. But before we get there, we need to understand the world in which positive change becomes necessary. The world before. The story always begins the same way. Not with revolution, not with protest, not with dramatic speeches. It begins with normality, or at least what people have come to accept as normal. The markets open, the schools function, the roads remain busy. Life appears ordinary on the surface. Yet beneath that surface, something is wrong. A small group controls most opportunities. Decisions affecting millions are made by a few. Criticism is discouraged. Innovation is restricted. Trust begins disappearing. People adapt to survive. They lower expectations. They stop asking questions. They learn to live within invisible boundaries. The most effective oppressive systems do not rely entirely on force. They rely on resignation, because once people become convinced that change is impossible, the system no longer needs to fight them. They surrender before the struggle even begins. And that is where the real danger lives. Not in the strength of the system, but in the weakness of hope. Yet hope has a strange habit. Even in the darkest environments, it refuses to die completely. The hidden problem. Most people assume oppression survives because powerful people are powerful. But history tells a different story. The real reason oppressive systems endure is because ordinary people remain disconnected. The teacher struggles alone. The student struggles alone. The trader struggles alone. The worker struggles alone. The farmer struggles alone. Each person sees only a piece of the problem. Each person believes their frustration is unique, and because they remain isolated, they underestimate their collective strength. Oppressive systems thrive on fragmentation. They encourage division, ethnic division, religious division, class division, regional division, generational division, anything that prevents cooperation, because divided people are predictable. Divided people are manageable. Divided people rarely organize. And without organization, even the largest population becomes powerless. Yet something begins changing when individuals discover that their struggles are shared, because shared awareness creates something dangerous. Solidarity. And solidarity changes everything. The rising threat. Throughout history, positive change rarely begins with a hero. It begins with an idea that spreads quietly from person to person, an idea that challenges accepted assumptions, an idea that asks a dangerous question. What if things do not have to remain this way? At first, the idea seems insignificant. A conversation between friends, a discussion in a community, a gathering of concerned citizens, a meeting in a classroom, a debate among workers. Nothing dramatic, nothing revolutionary, yet ideas possess a unique power. Unlike buildings, they cannot be demolished. Unlike individuals, they cannot be imprisoned. Unlike organizations, they can move freely across society. And once enough people embrace an idea, it becomes a movement. The authorities often fail to recognize the danger. They focus on visible threats, but ideas operate underground, quietly, patiently, relentlessly. By the time they become visible, they have already changed minds. And changed minds eventually change societies. But there was a problem. An idea alone is never enough. The warning signs. The first signs of change rarely look impressive. Attendance at meetings grows. Conversations become more frequent. People begin sharing experiences. Citizens start asking questions. Communities begin identifying common challenges. New networks emerge. Relationships form. Trust develops. To outsiders, these developments appear harmless, even insignificant, but history shows that oppressive systems become vulnerable. When people stop thinking as isolated individuals and start thinking as a community, the warning signs are subtle. People become informed. They become connected. They become confident. Most importantly, they begin imagining alternatives. And imagination is powerful, because every transformation begins as a possibility before it becomes a reality. Yet many movements fail at this stage. Why? Because awareness alone does not produce results. The real challenge is still ahead, the challenge of deciding what comes next. The critical decision. Every movement for positive change eventually faces a defining moment, a crossroads, a choice that determines its future. Should it react emotionally or organize strategically? This decision separates successful movements from forgotten ones. Anger can attract attention, but organization creates outcomes. Emotion can mobilize crowds, but structure sustains progress. History repeatedly rewards those who understand this distinction. The most effective movements invest in leadership development. They create communication networks. They establish clear goals. They train volunteers. They gather information. They develop strategies. They build institutions capable of surviving challenges. Most importantly, they focus on what they are building rather than only what they are opposing. Because opposition alone cannot sustain a movement indefinitely. People need a vision, a destination, a reason to sacrifice, a future worth pursuing. And when a movement provides that vision, something extraordinary begins to happen. Individuals start transforming into citizens. Citizens start transforming into leaders, and leaders start transforming communities. Yet even the most promising movements face dangers that many never see coming. And those dangers have destroyed countless efforts for change throughout history. Early success. At first, progress seems almost miraculous. The meetings become larger. The message spreads further. Volunteers emerge from unexpected places. People who once remained silent begin speaking. People who once felt powerless begin participating. Communities that barely interacted begin cooperating. Momentum builds. Small victories appear. A local problem is solved. An injustice is exposed. A policy is challenged. A neglected community gains attention. The movement starts believing its greatest obstacles are behind it. For the first time, change feels possible. The atmosphere shifts from frustration to optimism, from fear to confidence, from resignation to determination. Observers begin noticing. Supporters become energized. Even some members of the establishment quietly begin paying attention. It feels as though history is moving in the movement's direction. But history contains a warning. The most dangerous moment for any movement is often not during its weakest period. It is during its first taste of success. Because success creates something every bit as dangerous as oppression itself: overconfidence. And overconfidence has destroyed countless noble causes. The fatal flaw: every movement carries seeds of strength, but every movement also carries seeds of weakness. The danger often arrives disguised as progress. As influence grows, disagreements emerge. Some demand faster action. Others advocate patience. Some seek compromise. Others seek confrontation. Some remain focused on long-term goals. Others become consumed by short-term victories. At first, these disagreements appear manageable. After all, diversity of opinion is natural. But there is a hidden danger: ego. The desire for recognition. The desire for control. The temptation to place personal ambition above collective purpose. History repeatedly demonstrates that oppressive systems are not always defeated from the outside. Sometimes movements destroy themselves from within. Rivalries emerge, trust erodes, suspicion spreads. Energy once directed toward solving problems becomes redirected toward internal conflict. Meanwhile, those benefiting from the status quo watch carefully, patiently, waiting, because they understand something many movements forget. A divided movement rarely achieves lasting change, yet few people recognize the warning signs until the damage has already begun. Crack. Then comes the first setback, the first disappointment, the first major obstacle. A campaign fails. A proposal is rejected. A leader resigns. Resources become scarce. Support begins slowing. The momentum that once felt unstoppable suddenly feels fragile. Questions emerge. Were expectations unrealistic? Was the strategy flawed? Has the movement reached its limit? For many participants, this becomes a defining test, because enthusiasm is easy when progress is visible. Commitment is harder when progress becomes uncertain. Some leave. Others become discouraged. Critics declare the movement finished. The establishment celebrates quietly. After all, this is how change efforts usually end. Not with dramatic defeat, but with exhaustion. Yet history reveals an important truth. Most successful movements experience major setbacks before achieving meaningful victories. The difference lies in what happens next. Do people retreat? Or do they adapt? That choice changes everything. Before we continue, let me ask you something. If ordinary people had not challenged injustice, if courageous citizens had not organized, if determined communities had not refused to surrender hope, what kind of world would we be living in today? The freedoms many people enjoy were not gifts from powerful rulers. They were earned through the courage, sacrifice, and persistence of ordinary men and women who believed that a better future was possible. That is exactly why School of Revolution exists. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the hidden lessons of history, exposing the forces that shape societies, and helping people understand how leadership, freedom, power, and civic responsibility can transform nations. If you believe knowledge is power, if you believe informed citizens can change society, if you believe the greatest revolution begins in the mind, then join our growing community. Subscribe to School of Revolution, turn on notifications, and become part of a movement dedicated to awakening minds, inspiring leaders, and building a better future. Because those who understand history are better prepared to shape tomorrow. Now let's continue. The escalation, the pressure intensifies. Opposition becomes more sophisticated. Criticism becomes more aggressive. Attempts to divide supporters increase. Fear returns. The movement now faces challenges from every direction. External resistance, internal tension, resource shortages, public skepticism. The easy stage is over. Now comes the difficult work. building resilience, improving organization, strengthening relationships, developing new leaders, expanding networks, creating systems capable of surviving uncertainty. The movement begins learning, a lesson that every successful struggle eventually discovers. Change is not an event. It is a process, a long process, a difficult process, a process requiring discipline. Many people love the excitement of beginnings. Far fewer embrace the persistence required for success, and yet persistence is exactly what transforms ordinary efforts into historic movements. But an even greater test still lies ahead, a moment when neutrality becomes impossible, a moment when everyone must choose a side. The point of nitrogen monoxide return. Then comes the turning point, the moment when the underlying conflict becomes impossible to ignore. Perhaps a major injustice captures public attention. Perhaps a crisis exposes systemic failures. Perhaps a decision by those in power reveals the true nature of the problem. Whatever the trigger, something changes. The debate moves from private conversations into public consciousness. Citizens who once remained indifferent begin paying attention. Communities begin asking difficult questions. Institutions come under scrutiny. The stakes rise dramatically. No longer is the issue confined to a small group of organizers. Now society itself is involved. And with greater attention comes greater pressure. Every action is examined. Every mistake is amplified. Every decision carries consequences. The movement can no longer return to its earlier stage. The point of no return has arrived. History begins accelerating. Events that once unfolded over years now unfold over weeks, sometimes over days. The future remains uncertain. Victory is not guaranteed. Failure remains possible. Yet one thing has become clear. The status quo can no longer continue unchanged. The struggle has entered its decisive phase, and what happens next will determine whether hope triumphs over fear, or fear triumphs over hope. The deeper lesson. What does this teach us about power? First, power is rarely as strong as it appears. Most systems depend on cooperation, consent, participation, trust. When these begin disappearing, even powerful structures become vulnerable. Second, leadership matters. Not because leaders save people, but because great leaders help people discover their own capacity. They organize, they inspire, they connect, they develop others. Third, freedom is not self-sustaining. Every generation inherits institutions it did not build, and every generation must decide whether to strengthen or weaken them. Fourth, human nature contains a permanent tension: the desire for security and the desire for freedom, the desire for comfort and the desire for growth, the desire to remain passive and the responsibility to participate. Civilizations rise when enough people choose responsibility. They decline when too many choose indifference. History demonstrates this lesson repeatedly. The future belongs not to those who complain the most, but to those who organize the most effectively. Why this matters today? Many people assume oppression belongs to the past, that the great struggles for justice are already over. History suggests otherwise. Every generation faces new challenges, new forms of manipulation, new concentrations of power, new threats to accountability. The tools change, the technologies change, the language changes, but the underlying question remains remarkably similar. Will citizens participate in shaping their society, or will they surrender that responsibility to others? Positive change does not happen automatically. It requires informed citizens, strong communities, trustworthy institutions, responsible leadership, and perhaps most importantly, organized people willing to work patiently toward a better future. The lessons of history remain relevant because human nature remains remarkably consistent. The same forces that created positive change yesterday can create positive change today. The same mistakes that destroyed movements yesterday can destroy movements today. in the same courage that transformed societies yesterday can transform societies tomorrow. The choice has never belonged solely to leaders. It has always belonged to citizens. In closing, the story of positive change is not the story of heroes rescuing helpless people. It is the story of ordinary people discovering their collective strength. It is the story of citizens refusing to surrender hope. It is the story of communities choosing cooperation over division. Again and again, history has shown that oppressive systems appear permanent until the moment they are not. The greatest movements did not begin with perfect plans. They began with people willing to believe that a better future was possible. Then they organized. Then they persevered. Then they transformed their societies. The lesson is simple. Powerful change rarely starts with power. It starts with purpose. The warning is equally important. No society remains free, just, or prosperous by accident. Every generation faces the same choice: to participate, or to watch from the sidelines, to organize, or to complain, to build, or to surrender the future to others. Because history does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes, and the future belongs to those who prepare for it. If you enjoyed this exploration, subscribe to School of Revolution for more stories about history, power, leadership, freedom, and social transformation. Leave a comment below. What do you believe is the most important ingredient for positive change in society? And what lesson from history do you think today's generation cannot afford to forget? Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, the greatest revolution begins in the mind.